Thank you so much for staying tuned. In our discussion tonight, we'll be focusing on matters education in concern to the national examination. 1.9 million learners are expected to sit for the Kenya Certificate of Primary Education and Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education. And joining us via Zoom is Ms. Kcse, who is the National Chairperson of the Kenya Private School Association here in Kenya, to give us details of what should be done and what gaps are there currently. Thank you so much, Ms. Kcse, for joining us. A new report released has shown that when it comes to learners, they have shown some weakness in some of the subjects, even as they prepare for the national examination. As an education stakeholder, is this a crisis for the cohorts of Kcpe and Kcse candidates this particular year?
Yes, it would have been a crisis if the exam was done in October last year, because or November, because that's when the assessment was done. The results were being discussed this year. What is important about that particular assessment is for the general public to understand that that assessment was done in October last year. And it was meant to measure the learning losses after a pandemic so that we, the teachers, would know where to start. So that was what it was done. It was done at school level and it was marked at school level. So schools have had these results for a very long time. And we've therefore had nearly 4 months, 5 months, in fact, 6 months now, well, 4 months from October of bridging those gaps. And learning is interesting. It's cyclical. Once the reminder has been done, kids roll back into the system and into the swing of learning, and they remember because they are being reminded constantly. So we're very ready for the Kcpe, we are very ready for Kcse. And the important thing, I think the worry here is Kcpe, sorry. The main thing to remember is that Kcpe is a placement exam. It is not really a mark of intelligence. It's not an intelligence exam. How many children have we all known in our communities who perhaps didn't do so well in Kcpe, but go on to excel in Kcse? That tells you something about that exam. It is meant to place students into secondary schools. It is a placement exam. It is not a mark of intelligence. So no matter whatever outcomes come, every child in Kenya is guaranteed of a secondary school's place. That's a fact. And that's the one thing this cabinet secretary has really worked hard to ensure, that every single child who sits for Kcpe goes to a secondary school. So therefore, your question then becomes a bit of like, for us in education, we are feeling that the narrative that is being pushed about that assessment is actually frightening kids unnecessarily without telling them the fact. Kcpe is not an exam that measures your intelligence. It is a placement exam. Simple.
All right. Now, given that the assessment was done in October and you've had 4 months to sort of bridge the competency learning gaps, so far, do you think enough has been done, given that we have had situation and statistics that have shown that close to 40,000 students have not returned to school? Are we there yet in terms of quite well preparation?
For us in the private sector, we have had the impact of the pandemic has been pretty brutal on both parents and schools. But we have put in place measures right from the reopening for the candidates to ensure that any candidate who was in a school that closed has been placed somewhere. The government has been extremely magnanimous and opened up its schools for all parents who felt that their incomes do not allow them anymore to be in a private school, no matter where that private school is or no matter the caliber of private schools. So for once, I feel that the education system has worked as one unit to just ensure that no child is denied a chance. That is not to say that we don't have the effects of the prolonged closure, especially on the girl child, the slightly maturer student in primary school, where we are still not quite sure how to recover in totality. The offer is still there. Let all candidates come back. And we hope on Kcpe Day. I mean, these are not problems that are new to our society. We've always had a huge problem with teenage pregnancies and these things. These are societal problems that need a bigger concerted effort than just education to call out to come back to school. We need something being done at community level, at homes, to ensure that we minimize these numbers that we year in, year out we have. But otherwise, the system is ready to accommodate the students no matter where they are, whatever state they're in. We have consistently, all of us, both public and private, invited back students, no matter whether they are pregnant, whatever is happening, come back to school. We've kept these places open. And because these kids are already registered as candidates, we are expecting them back on rehearsal day and day one of Kcpe. And we truly hope that they can manage to come back. Right. There's been a multi-agency effort to track and trace all students wherever they are, right down, trickling down through the Ministry, the Interior, and the Nyumba Kumi, to try and just tag and trace where these students are, so that they can be verbally informed from a closer network at home that their place in school is still available.
All right.
Now, I think as an education sector, that's the best we can really do.
All right. Now, when you look into the effects of or the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, the private schools were greatly affected and some even shut down. Have there been a clear framework to ensure that the students who were in private schools that were closed down now join public schools? Because you have had an outcry from some parents saying that the government has done minimal when it comes to ensuring that the children who had to move to other public schools were having a hard time trying to get registered.
This is not quite true. I think I can sort of intervene there and say that both public and private, we really opened our doors, and the cabinet secretary, nobody can defy a cabinet secretary. When a directive is issued like that, every child gets a place if they want it. And for us in the private schools, we've seen a lot of movement across schools, and we were all very accommodating to make sure that in neighborhoods where schools shut, kids were immediately absorbed in nearby schools. And so far, we've not really had an issue that we've not been able to sort. Sometimes we saw movement, like not just neighborhoods. We saw parents, because of loss of income, moving away from the areas where they used to live and having trouble even understanding the kind of schools in the new neighborhoods where they are. And we've done our best to sort them out. Our priority, of course, was sorting out the candidates. That's where the pressure was. And the rest, as they opened in January, it's been sort of the whole of January was spent resettling, absorbing, moving about, and making sure that there are no kids just sitting at home doing nothing. And schools were able to track and trace and know whether the kids are either moved to another school or moved to a public school. All that data has been now compiled. And we are reasonably confident as a private sector that we have settled everybody who needed to be settled. Right. As a private sector. I can speak on my behalf.
Yeah, sure. Now, let's look into the issue of Kcse, the Kenya National Certificate of Secondary Education. We are seeing a situation whereby some students are lagging behind, and you will admit that in areas like Baringo or in areas where there are water areas in Northeastern, and therefore there has been an issue on how the exam will be standardized, because for some, they are not even finished the syllabus of Form 3. Now they're catching up with Form 4. And therefore, there's an issue of a gap there in terms of how they're getting to connect and catch up with their syllabus, even as they prepare for the national examination. Have we seen a situation whereby the Minister of Education now gets into the table to see where the students are and make sure that they test them in accordance to what they have covered so far, some standardization of sorts?
Our education system in secondary schooling is, like I said, Kcpe is a placement exam. It places students according to the marks that they get in Kcpe. So they go to a different caliber of school depending on what they scored. So when you talk of standardization, how can it even work? It can't really work. So the secondary school kids are generally, like this year, they are all adults. The Kcse students are all over 18. For many of us, we are asking that there be a synchrony between the students' effort and the teachers' effort, given that there is a pandemic that was at play here, first and foremost, that gave students actually more time to revise for these exams and to read ahead. We are not talking babies here. At Form 4 right now, in another system, if we were in the old system, these kids would be in Form 5. So we are not discussing babies here, yeah? So it's not like primary school where the teacher takes a huge center stage in ensuring learning continues. With the older students, there's a responsibility for the student that they can take. And we saw it in all our communities where we'd see four students from different schools actually banding together to revise during the pandemic, to just keep themselves busy and focused on the end game. They knew Kcse was coming. And therefore they worked towards it. So here, right now, we cannot discuss the same issues we are discussing with secondary, with primary schools. There's a personal responsibility for an 18, 19-year-old that they must take for their own life. After all, they are an adult now. So who else is supposed to take responsibility? The curriculum has been open. It's not a secret. They know they have all the learning materials and they are easily accessible. And most schools actually allowed students to carry home their books and things like that. So really, I don't understand how any moderation of that exam would help. Who would it help and how would it even begin to be done? We do accept that there are areas that have historical challenges, and let me call them that, historical challenges. Those challenges are not new to this country right now. You know, like the issues of flooding, they happened and they perpetually happened. We had before Baringo, we had Tana River before the pandemic, where schools were closed for about 3-4 months. Nobody called for moderation of the exam because of them. So for us as an education system, I think what perhaps we could be discussing going forward is our readiness for disaster management and how to mitigate and ensure that learning continues at all times. This is the time now to make sure that KICD is very strong, and its online and digital lessons, radio, TV lessons are very strong, that they can enable teaching when school is not going on in localized areas, so that kids in areas where there's insecurity, there's what happening, they know even if this week our school is shut, our teachers will tell us, go to this radio lesson, make sure on this time there's an SMS system going on to alert parents to make sure kids are focused on this. We must cease giving excuses about how learning must take place when there is a disaster happening, whether localized or national. We must stop giving excuses. This time during the pandemic, we saw excuses being given such that even parents just switched off the whole idea of learning, yet it was there, it was available, and it was accessible. If we were to go by our census data, it shows that radio penetration is very, very high. It shows that mobile phone penetration with internet is very high. But because there was a national narrative that that there is no access, parents just sat back as well, because they are hearing from the radios, they are hearing from the TVs, they are hearing from this and that, but there is no equal access, yet the content is there. So it became a question of mwenye masikio amesikia na anafanya. So it became, for those whose families are progressive, they access the learning. And they organized kids in neighborhoods. They did this and that and ensured kids were not just running wild in communities. But therefore, it was a very small percentage, yet we could have rallied ourselves as a country and embraced online learning, radio, TV. You know, we just could have, we didn't. So now, going forward, we must just put it down very clearly so that these localized disruptions due to weather, climate change, as we are seeing, insecurity, are not impacting the children so negatively. So that whole communities, you know, like if you're in a household of a group of 10 households, you can take charge of your communities and say, so and so has a TV, can all kids from grade 1 to 4 go there and be watching there? It can be done. Rwanda does it. West Africa did it during the Ebola crisis. Therefore, we can. It's just us guys, we love our negative publicity so much. We focus on it rather than the actual good things that continue to happen. That I am in the private sector. Why am I praising the government? Because it's a good thing. Why shouldn't I praise a good thing when it is there?
Right. Now, let's focus on the issue of the competency learning gap. You have said that, of course, Kcpe is just a placement exam, but when it comes to the way parents see it, some of them will think from a point of, if you have not passed your Kcpe exam, then there's no point of me paying your secondary school education, even though it's free. Others will say that because you failed your Kcpe exam, there's no point of getting to early marriage, and therefore the perception of Kcpe exam has not been debunked quite correctly. And thus, parents have complained concerning the issue of the competency learning gaps when it comes to Kcpe. Don't you think it's a concern and something of worry, given the perception that is given concerning the Kenya Certificate of Primary Education?
2 years in a row, 2 years now in a row, every child who sat for Kcpe has been put in a secondary school and has reported. So what does that say? Mm-hmm. It says that with determined effort, we can actually make this work. Mm-hmm. 2 years in a row, no child has been left behind. So therefore, that means we are headed in the right direction on this. Mm-hmm. And that the problems we must deal with are not those ones. There are others, like our schools, our public schools are overcrowded. What can we do?
Yeah, sure.
Perhaps we can take advantage of the 165,000 Form 1 slots that the private sector has to decongest some of the public schools. Rank private schools or do whatever, like deep thinking on how we can actually sort out the real issue. The issue is not now transition. The issue now is a congestion issue in our, especially boarding schools. So how do we deal with it? I think we need to turn our eyes to where the problem is, rather than look at older problems that have actually been very quietly sorted and done away with, and then now we look at what else, what are now once we have done 100% transition, what are the emergent problems there? Let's sort those ones so that we can systematically fix our education system and make sure it works for every child. But so far right now, I can safely say with a lot of authority that we do not have a problem with transition. Kids are now, any kid who sits for Kcpe is now moving to Form 1. Guaranteed. Our cabinet secretary himself sometimes, like the whole month, like last year up to mid-Feb, they were still following up kids. And we were mandated as schools, as primary schools, to make sure that every child who started Kcpe in every school has actually reported to the school that they have been called to. So I think that's a huge success in the history of this country. There's never been, all 50, however many years we have been independent, the last 2 years was where we've had 100% transition. And I think that's a very big win we need to celebrate, because then now what it means is that we are winning the cultural battle. The high stakes nature of Kcpe can't be healthy for children. It really cannot be healthy for children. We've seen stories in the past where kids, when they don't get a certain grade, they commit suicide, they self-harm. We need to stop that. They're too young for that. So the idea of CBC is to put in a check and balance towards that high stakes nature of this particular exam, so that we can rightfully put it where it deserves. When the kids are older, they're able to decision make. At secondary school, at Kcse stage, they're able to decision make. They're adults. So you can, they make their own personal decisions. And that's better when there's a high stakes exam at that level compared to when there's a high stakes exam when they're so young. And the point is that exam is purely for placement. What are parents fighting for? They're fighting for a well-equipped school. Simple. They want their kids in a school that guarantees better outcomes. So with CBC now, we are saying now we need to pump in resources into all schools. That's it. Yeah. Reduce the stakes so that we make sure each school is as well resourced as possible.
Sure.
It will take time, but that's the aim.
Yeah. Okay, now when you're focusing on that particular report, just like Kcpe and Kcse, we have seen that private schools have performed better as compared to public schools, despite the COVID-19 pandemic that greatly had a huge negative impact in private schools. Perhaps as the national chairperson of the Kenya Private School Association, what can be attributed to this particular trajectory despite the harsh times?
When public schools were when for us in the private sector, we really talked about online learning, and we encouraged parents, schools, no matter what level, to at least do something for their kids wherever they could, whatever they could. The Kenya Private Schools Association went as far as putting together a platform for the schools that didn't have the infrastructure to offer online learning, so they can onboard and offer it there. So for us, we embraced alternative methods of learning, and that paid off. I need to debunk something that perhaps might come out and might be an interpretation of that report. Let us be clear. At primary level, private schools will always do better than public schools, with or without a pandemic.
All right.
every year KCPE results show private schools do better. So it's not about the pandemic or anything. It's just that at that level, at a mixed ability learning space, private schools have better outcomes than public schools, even if the private school is in a slum.
All right.
Yeah, so it's not really about the pandemic. That is the way things have been and possibly will continue to be. Um, uh, it's a mix of factors: smaller classes, a tighter monitor teacher. For us, it's a whole different set of circumstances that are more difficult to monitor in public schools. So let's not confuse and draw conclusions very quickly. If KCP was brought, we had done KCP in March 2019, private schools would have still done better than public schools. Fact. Yeah, that one is a given. In secondary schools, public schools will do better than private schools. Fact. And they will do, even now, this pandemic, public schools will do better than private schools in secondary. So that's it.
All right, that's
and it's a simple case that in secondary schools we put all our best kids into public schools, so they will do better. Alliance will do better, and it's full of private school kids. So,
all right, that's a good
illustration. So there's just a good thinking point as we look at that data from that assessment, so that conclusion cannot be drawn. There are deeper issues, in short. Yeah, but on the pandemic, our kids had fewer learning losses because we really did push our kids to make sure that they didn't sit idle, they didn't, we did experience learning losses, especially for the younger children, but already we have already recovered. You get my point. We've already recovered. But on the whole, when it comes to now KCP, we always do better. So, and then we put all those well-performing kids in the best public schools, and therefore they do better at Kcse.
Kcpe. Now, finally, because we are pressed on time, now looking at the situation as it is, we are 3 weeks to the national examination, I think even less than 3 weeks, and therefore
yes.
Children are preparing in earnest, teachers are also preparing, and there have been some sort of pressure concerning this particular cohort who are doing the national examination. Finally, what can you tell us in terms of the interventions that should be placed 3 weeks to the national examination to avoid our children getting into a panic mode due to whatever they are seeing outside there and whatever reports are coming concerning the national examinations?
One thing I want to tell children is that never to be afraid of hard work. Hard work does pay. So I want to urge children, if there are any listening, and if there are parents of children with standard 8 candidates for 4 candidates, just encourage them to work hard. If anything, the pandemic taught us a few lessons, that we must be very resilient. And resilience is a product of hard work, determination, and a focus on the end game. There were winners and losers in this pandemic. I want to believe the children, our reopening strategy has been a win for the children, and therefore the children's outcomes will reflect that win. It shouldn't be, I believe right now as a country, we must encourage our young ones to focus and to aim on success. It is a mindset. I'm a teacher by training. I'm not a preacher or anything like that. But I do know this. If children are surrounded by doom and gloom, they will lose hope. If they are surrounded by positivity and a bright vision of a clear vision of a bright future, they will get encouraged. A quick example is how much fear there was when we reopened in October compared to how that fear had dissipated because the reopening in October was successful. Therefore, the kids in October, parents held back kids. They were afraid of taking kids to school, especially the grade 4s. They felt pushed to the corner because the national narrative was one of fear. The kids themselves came with that fear to school. Come January, because parents had realized that there was nothing wrong in reopening and the narratives had changed, the kids in January came back extremely positive and determined to work. So as we head towards the exam, what is it that we are telling the kids can go wrong, and why? What facts do we have to say that? We all need, especially if we are all in spaces where we can be heard by parents, can be heard by students, that we have done it as a country. We have literally reopened the entire education system, and the messages of doom and gloom have been left behind, and all those people who are peddling them are sat somewhere quietly, and we need them to continue sitting quietly so that we can give the kids of this country a hope after a very broken year in 2019, in 2020. So their lives are not defined by doom and gloom, that they can understand that it is possible to rise from that and actually succeed. There's no reason why our children should do poorly in Kcpe and in Kcse. I think we all need to just have one conversation that helps students understand, yes, last year was different, but you don't slip back and expect a mark to be given to you free of charge. You still have to work for it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Muthayo Kasanga, for making time and giving us a perspective concerning the issue of national examination in Kenya and the issue of competency learning gaps. Many thanks indeed.
Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. All right, that is Ms. Muthayo Kasanga there giving us a perspective concerning the issue of national examination. The main message being we should not throw our kids into a panic mode due to what is happening around us, in particular for those who are getting to get the national examination, to sit for the national examination come next month. We are taking a short break. We'll be back with more. Do stay tuned.
Panari Group offers an oasis of serenity, wonderful views and tranquility